Welcome to Escaping the Echo Chamber. Glad to have you on the channel. And what we're doing today is we're just watching a video of Brandon Tatum. And in fact, Brandon Tatum, I've done some videos on him in the past, but this video is going to be reaction to some testimony that he gave in front of Congress earlier this year. This was a virtual hearing that was held back in February. And I said, hey, this is an interesting topic because I want to see basically where he and I are on the issues. So without further ado, let's get into the video.
I just want to first off say thank you, Jerry Nadler, Sheila Jackson Lee, Ranking Member Big, for having me. This is a true honor and a testimony in our country that we've come a long way, and that a person of color like myself have access to speak. And I think it speaks volumes of how far we've come. And I think that it's time in our country that we don't return back to the things that many want to retain in our history. We should continue to move forward.
So now I want to actually point out what that many want to retain. Exactly who are you talking about wants to retain whatever this is you're speaking of? Because based on some of the things I've heard him say, I think I know what he means, but the lack of specificity does nobody any favors. The lack of specificity, a failure to specifically mention what it is you're talking about, doesn't do anybody any favors. And we've just seen celebrations over Ketanji Brown Jackson. And the fact is, just because a black face has reached a position of authority does not mean that the problems of the black community as a whole have been solved and, oh, everything's good now. It doesn't mean it when the left is trying to pretend that's what it means. It doesn't mean it when that's what the right is trying to pretend that's what it means. And it appears that that's what he's doing right now. Well, because I can stand here in front of Congress and speak, which number one is not as much as a historical accomplishment as he thinks it is. And I think the reason why he thinks this is such a historical accomplishment is because, based on stuff I've seen from him, he doesn't know history. But let him continue.
First thing that I want to say is that it's very important for us to be able to define acts of terrorism and be able to investigate them thoroughly. We have to understand that there's a lot of hoax that have been perpetuated over the last several years. And I want us to, in addition to focusing on the hate crimes, and I think that every single person that is here understands that it's a problem in our country and that we need to address it vigorously. But we also need to identify the influx of people who are coming out, creating situations and lying about hate crime and violence in certain situations to gain traction in their particular movement. There has been a tremendous increase, like I said, it's written in my statement, and we have seen it happen all too often on college campuses. Unfortunately, many of them are perpetuated by minorities in our communities. Young ladies who have made statements that they were writing and racial slurs perpetuated on campus, some nooses and other things that are associated with hate crimes, come to find out that they were all perpetuated by the person who reported it. So in addition to our research and
okay. What he just did, so when he says that we have to also be aware of hoaxes, yes, absolutely. And once again, hoaxes do nobody any favors. But then he goes and he says, that people had claims of racial slurs and nooses, and all of them were done by the perpetrator themselves. Whoa, 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 whoa. That, if you're speaking about hoaxes, well, yes, that's what a hoax is. The hoax is a false claim. It's not real. It wasn't actually what it was claimed to be. But if you're trying to claim that these threats, that these allegations of these issues, these incidents, are all done by the perpetrator themselves, no. And so you may say, no, but he meant hoaxes. Well, then it was no need to say that that's a hoax by definition was done by the perpetrator, by the person themselves. By definition, it's a hoax. They are lying. They have falsely claimed something that isn't true. And if otherwise, it wouldn't be a hoax. It would be a mistake. It would be it would be a misunderstanding. And because, like he said with nooses, there's an incident he's talking about. There's an incident that he may be referring to, that many on the right have referred to, that was not a hoax. It was turned out not to be what it was thought it was going to be, what it was initially thought it was. But the person that was the possible potential target was not the person that did it. It turns out that this had been there before them. When his team noticed it, they thought that this was done and sent directly as a message to them, when in reality, that appeared to have been there for some time, and it wasn't a direct. But he, that individual, and I'm talking about the NASCAR driver, Bubba Wallace, had nothing to do with it.
Efforts to combat terrorism in institutions, we also need to look at and help verify whether or not these things are true or not. I want to talk about another issue that I think will speak to the very grounds of people in our country who have been demoralized. And I think that is the lack of retaining God in our consciousness. I really would love to see people who are in leadership in our government continue to retain God and not throw God away and act as if God wasn't the help and the foundation of this country. The reason that
What part of separation of church and state are you not getting? I'm really trying to figure that out. What part of separation of church and state do you not get? God was
we are where we are today in our country is because the Judeo-Christian values that we have retained. And I think that people have been demoralized, and they're apt to commit these crimes and be hateful towards one another because of the absence of God.
Oh, this is what I'm talking about when I talk about not knowing history. So if you don't know how religious the Klan was, very religious. If you don't know, like, the people that founded this country, religious freedom, right? And yet they owned other people. They owned other people. So to sit here and say that this value system, that the loss of this value system is causing the division, is absolutely ahistorical. The history fundamentally, thoroughly, and completely eviscerates your assertion. The history completely eviscerates your assertion. It completely demolishes your assertion. It completely dismantles what you've just said. The history shows that what you just said about the loss of religion is what's causing the division, when in fact, and by your own admission, okay, if this country was founded with these principles, with founded with religion in mind, okay, then why was there so much hatred and division at the beginning? Because that's where this started, right? That's where this started. This started with people who wanted religious freedom, owning other human beings, degrading other human beings, slaughtering other human beings, terrorizing other human beings, and then lying to themselves that this was justified because those other human beings were either not really human or just much lesser humans.
And I'll add as well, when it comes to law enforcement, many people who are on this Zoom call right now have been perpetuating hatred towards law enforcement officers, and has led to the police officers being dejected. They are not engaging. They are not being proactive. And many of these efforts, or many of the lack of efforts on behalf of police officers who are scared to do their job, fearful of terrorist activity against them, and also fearful of judgment, prejudgment, and being called a racist and working in a racial institution, these officers are not able, or they are not proactively policing, which will deter a lot of these actors from going to synagogue, from acting out in violence. The ones who are standing in the gap for us to protect our citizens are the police officers. And when you diminish them, they're no longer going to be there. They're retiring, they're quitting, and we cannot get enough officers in the field to combat it. And I want everybody on here to understand that our law enforcement officers are incredibly important if we are going to fight against this influx of terrorism and terrorist behavior. And the last thing that I would say is that we do need to also include the institution of the family. Many of these.
Oh my God. Okay, so the whole thing about law enforcement, I guarantee you there's a bunch of Democrats that agree with him because despite their rhetoric, Democrats are not as opposed to the police as they would have many in the public believe, especially many in the black community. And I've talked about this, that police are basically just the scapegoats so that the black community can look at police for the problems that are caused by horrible legislation. But politicians don't want us looking at them for passing these laws. They just want to point the finger at the cops for enforcing these laws. But like I said, there's a bunch of people a bunch of Democrats that will agree that police are the answer to solving this. And the mention of, oh, police are demoralized, they don't want to, like, if you don't want to do your job, then maybe you shouldn't have the job. That's the way I'm looking at it. If you're saying, for all of him saying that police are afraid, the reality in the streets would indicate otherwise. Police are still running up on young black men, still just like wilding out on young black men, still killing young black men. And so if you're saying, but they're afraid to actually do their job, like they have no problem running up on people in New York for hopping a turnstile. They have no problem running up on people who've got some drugs on them. Like, that's not a problem. They have no problem murdering a dude for selling loose cigarettes. No problem. But you're claiming they had a problem. They have a problem investigating terroristic threats because they're afraid. That doesn't sound at all sensible. But if it's true, then what's being indicated is that these are people that probably shouldn't be in that position of authority anyway.
Minority communities are falling apart, and we see a lot of degradation because of the institution of the family that's under attack. So in addition to the college and universities and other black businesses, I also think we should focus, in addition, on the black family and inner city minority family, because the stronger the family becomes, the better prepared they are, the better people are put out into society, and the better equipped they are in not becoming victims in the society that we live in. I want to first.
I'm curious how much time he had to prepare for this, because like I gotta assume that they called him that morning, said, yeah, we need you on a Zoom call to testify in front of Congress. I gotta assume. I hope that's what happened, because if you had any significant amount of time to prepare for this was ridiculous. The family, like, so that they don't become victims. What? If they have strong families, what about the AME church? Like, what? In order to stop the threats of racist violence against black people need to have the family. And he's not saying that that's what they need to do to be able to protect themselves, because then that would come along with having strong families and like the Second Amendment and being vigilant. And then that's when he would also be able to say, and police are not as important because it's up to us to protect ourselves and not depend on police. Cool, great. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is police are needed to protect people, but the family is needed to improve society and stop these threats from happening. Like, wait a minute, what? So these threats, racist threats against black people and these black institutions are occurring because there's dysfunction in the black family from his, like, what? Remember when AOC made that thing about minimum wage and multiple jobs? This is one of those moments. And nobody covered it.
End this by saying thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to have my voice being heard, and I'm here to answer any questions subsequent to my testimony. Thank you.
I really hope they didn't ask him any questions. So somebody probably did, just for the fun of it, just to see what kind of nonsense he regurgitated. But this was ridiculous. The family, we need stronger families to stop threats of racist violence. Wow. In order to stop terroristic threats against black people need to focus on the family. What is this? Is this a Fast and Furious movie? It's all about the family. What? Oh man. This is hilarious. Like, this is who the Republican establishment embraces. People that have no substance, no knowledge of history, or who demonstrate no knowledge of history, no solutions, and just parrot a predetermined set of talking points. Back to blue, strong families, and oh yeah, race hoaxes. Like, these are because by the way, it may not be immediately clear what this was supposed to be about. This wasn't about police. This was supposed to be about threats, terroristic threats against black institutions. Because if you remember earlier the year, there was a bunch of threats to like HBCUs, and so this is what this hearing was about. Was about these kinds of threats, this kinds of activity, seemingly on the rise, and that was his testimony. Well, thank you for checking out this video. As always, don't forget to hit the thumbs up, like, share, subscribe. If you disagree with me, feel free to tell me in the comment section what you think I got wrong. What am I missing? And maybe there's a correlation that I haven't completely realized exists between the things he's talking about and stopping terroristic threats against historically black universities. Feel free to put that in the comment section, and I will see you next time.